Good evening, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being with us tonight. And thank you to those who are joining us virtually. We cannot do programs like these without you. I mean that. So your attendance here is fantastic. I think we've got close to 200 plus people virtually. It's really great. So we appreciate your support. We've got another lecture coming up on the 23rd of February. Cecilia Tichy is the professor emerita at Vanderbilt University, and she has written a book called Cocktail Culture of the Gilded Age. Sounds great. We're going to learn about martinis and Manhattans and old-fashioned. Every ticket for that night for a live attendance is sold. I'm sorry. So you're going to have to stay at home and watch virtually, but it might be a lot more fun because you can drink and learn a lot from. I can't wait to hear her. I actually interviewed her on a radio show, and she's very entertaining and very interesting. So tonight we have two fantastic speakers who are addressing fashioning America, African-American designers and dressmakers. We're going to learn about two very interesting women who created garments for privileged Newporters. How did that happen? What kind of impact did they have on American history? The two women are Mary Dickerson and Ann Lowe, and you're going to hear a lot about their achievements from our speakers tonight. Our first speaker is Theresa Guzmán Stokes. She is the executive director of the Rhode Island Black Heritage Society. Does everybody know Theresa? Because she is a Newporter. We've got to give her a round of applause. We love Theresa. And she's a distinguished writer and historian and community activist. She's a phenomenal community activist, trying to bring attention to African-American history, Latin American history, Jewish diasporic histories, and she does a great job. I think everybody would agree. She is also the president and founder of the 1696 Heritage Group, which is a historical consulting firm helping individuals and institutions grapple with their histories, appreciate their histories, bring their histories to life. And tonight she is going to tell us all about Mary Dickerson, who lived in Newport, ran a business in Newport, owned a fashionable dressmaking firm on Bellevue Avenue, and also established the first federation of African-American clubs in Rhode Island. We're going to learn about that too. Our second speaker for the evening is Elaine Nichols, the Supervisory Curator of Culture at the Smithsonian National Museum of African-American History and Culture in Washington. And because of unforeseen circumstances, she is going to join us virtually, and I'm very happy that she can. She is responsible for the museum's collection of dress, fashion, textiles, dolls, toys, and games. I mean, this just can't be serious. That would be so much fun. She has served as the curator for the Civil Rights History Project, which was a collaboration with the Library of Congress that collected oral histories of more than 100 grassroots activists, supporters, and national leaders involved in the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s. She has a master's in public service archaeology from the University of South Carolina and a master's in social administration and planning from Case Western University. Tonight, she will be sharing the story of Ann Lowe, one of America's most significant designers. You may know her name because she designed the bridal gown and bridal dresses for Jackie Kennedy. And Jackie Kennedy, as we all know, was married here in Newport in 1953. And in the audience tonight, joining us virtually, we have a Rhode Island resident who learned about tonight's lecture and called to share with us the story that her wedding dress was actually created by Ann Lowe in 1966. Louise Weschler kindly gave us permission to share the image of her dress. So here it is. Hello, Louise. Thank you. She stated that her mother had seen this dress and was gushing over it and insisted that they look up Ann Lowe. They went to New York, visited Ms. Lowe in her second floor studio, and convinced her to design a dress. It was 3 layers, not a typical wedding dress because it had a bottom layer in blue. It was designed exactly the way Miss Weschler wanted it to be, and Ms. Lowe was very gracious about that. And Louise's daughter, Elena, was also married in the dress in 2008, needed a little bit of work because of deterioration, but it was done. So thank you, Louise, for sharing your story with us and helping bring a local story about Ann Lowe to all of us. And tonight, after tonight's presentation, our fantastic curator, director of museum affairs, and chief curator, Leslie Jones, is going to facilitate a discussion between Theresa and Ms. Nichols. And then if time allows, will be questions from the audience here. And then we ask you to join us in the Marble House Hall for cocktails. So please, without further ado, please, let's all welcome Theresa Stokes.
Good evening. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It makes me so comfortable to be able to stare out over the crowd and see a lot of friendly faces. I'm going to be telling you the story of Mary Dickerson. Mary H. Dickerson came to us from Haddam, Connecticut, actually from New Haven. When she was young, she learned to sew, presumably from her mother, became a dressmaker at a young age in New Haven, and later comes to Newport. As you can see, she advertised having the fashionable French patterns that were popular of the day. Lovely dresses that I have to credit because we do not have any of Mrs. Dickerson's dresses or her designs. I'm going to credit the historian of the Black Heritage Society, Dr. Sherry Cummings, with having created these through AI using French patterns. As you can see, this is a picture of the Travers block. I think all of us are familiar with it. The Travers block was completed in 1871 for William Travers, who had had his mansion designed by none other than Richard Morris Hunt. He then convinced him to create this commercial building. By 1872, Mary H. Dickerson, an African-American woman, opened a popular dress shop in the Travers block. And we all know what was going on along Bellevue Avenue. Mary H. Dickerson was a dressmaker. That's what she was, but that's not who she was. So we're going to step behind the veil and we're going to meet Mary Huntington Dickerson. Mary was born in 1830 in Haddam, Connecticut, the daughter of Henry and Sarnay Huntington. When she was still young, they decided they wanted better life. They moved to New Haven where there was more opportunities, and that was where she grew up. When she was about 25 years old, she met and married John P. Vermong, who was a barber, and the two of them lived there for at least 10 years before he died suddenly. Mary had friends in Newport who she visited, which had a vibrant African-American community. And there she met and married Silas Dickerson. Silas Dickerson was a grocer. If you see the Thanksgiving flyer that is there, he and a number of African heritage men were involved in men's clubs. They put on talks, lectures. All the prominent African Americans were a part of this, including Benjamin Burton, who was also from New Haven. And it's my assumption that Mary would have been close to his wife as he was socializing with her husband. In 1895, Mary established the Women's Newport League. Do we have any league members here? No? I thought we would have a few. 1896, she established the Northeastern Association of Colored Women's Clubs. And by 1903, she established the first Federation of African Americans Women's Clubs in Rhode Island. Mary was known not only in Newport, she was known in Washington, D.C., she was known in Boston. She was extremely active with these women's clubs. And make no mistake, these were not knitting clubs. They were arguing for women's rights. Now think of the date, 1880s, 1890s, they're already arguing for women's rights. They're fighting for anti-lynching laws, which was an extremely important thing to her. More importantly to her, she had an obsession with the uplifting of young girls and women. There's another thing that was important to Mary, and that was her race's identity and how they were seen. Early on, in magazines, in newspapers, the African American was not shown in a favorable light. They were shown as caricatures. They were shown as uncouth. And so it became very important to Mary that she present herself and those women that were in her clubs with dignity, grace, always looking forward. It's probably one of the strongest things that she did. This young woman is a laundress in Newport. But this is how she would want to be seen. And with the advent of photography and Photoshops opening up all over, it became affordable, and it became a way for them to reclaim their bodies, their identity, and their dignity. You could be a laundress, you could be a seamstress, you could be a carpenter, but you can walk into a Photoshop and have your photo taken in your Sunday best and let the world see you the way you see yourself. As I mentioned about her social clubs, Mary felt it was very important to bring people together. She brought people together to fight against the wrongs that were going on in her community and in her country, and to present themselves as educated, knowledgeable people. Most importantly, to her and to many African Americans of that time, the anti-lynching laws was one of the most important things that was going on at that time. Second to that was the rights for women to vote, rights for women to have equal standing with men. And Mary fought for that, not just as a Black woman, but just as a woman, she felt it was right. So much so that in 1900, W.E.B. Du Bois put out a call to 100 people across the country to give him photographs of African Americans at play, at worship, at work, so that people could see at the Paris exhibition. They had a Negro exhibition that took up 1/4 of the space that was allotted for the United States. He brought photo albums, he brought handbills, he brought so many things so that people could see how African Americans were progressing and achieving. And so with this call, Mary was asked to select photographs of people in Newport and what they did and how they achieved. Some of the photographs that she showed, I'm showing you here. One was of Dr. Marcus Wheatland. How many of you know that name? We drive on Wheatland Boulevard, don't we? Certainly, one of the first African-American doctors. More importantly, if you see the other photograph with the children, the Women's League of Newport in 1900 were already concerned with the working woman. And one of the things that they were concerned about is who's going to care for their children while they're at work. And so they established the Newport, let me see if I got this right, Newport Day Nursery. And women could drop their children off in the morning as they went off to work. The children were well cared for, fed, until the mother could come back and pick them up. This is 1900. We're still fighting over issues over daycare. But you know what? The African-American community of Newport solved their own problems, and this is how they solved that problem. While she was out there trying to fix the world, she still needed to have a living. She was still a dressmaker. She was making dresses for all the prominent people of Newport, but she was a savvy businesswoman. This is a tax record from 1891. And one of the things that I want to make clear here, her husband, Silas, is listed as owning a property and paying taxes. But if you look at the name right above him, that's Mary. As a woman, this is from 1891, had already started buying property. And she didn't stop there. She goes on to buy 2 properties on Gould Street, 2 properties on Newport Avenue. And then, because she was then a widow, she also had William Street, Holland Street, and Gladden Court. I want you all, those of you that are Newporters, to think about those streets today. How many of us can afford those houses? In 1900, her total evaluation was $14,417. Now, that wasn't market value. You know how the taxes work. That was the tax value. In today's property value, that is $5,080,794.96, or 86 cents rather. Sorry, missed it by 10 cents. Mary knew that the only way to wealth, individual wealth, was through the acquisition of property. And so she was able to purchase one house and then another and then another. And so you wonder, what did she do with those houses if she wasn't living in them? Well, she was running a boarding house. She was renting them out. I found one notice in church records that the pastor of Trinity Church was looking for a place to live, and that was considered as one of them. She was very astute in what she did, saved her money, bought more property, and continued on in that way through her entire life. By the time she died, as you can see, she had what is today over $5 million in property. Mary, and I keep calling her Mary, I refuse to just say Dickerson. This is Mary, was not only a smart woman, but when she died, people wrote about her in her obituaries about how she worked so hard at uplifting her race. Mary knew that she didn't need to look to society for things to happen. For example, one of the things that was happening in the world around Mary was that Newport was becoming a more and more popular resort area. All the rich people from New York were coming here. So what happened? You had Benjamin Burton running a transport company. You had George Downing running a hotel and a catering business. These were men and women who understood that there was opportunities here, opportunities to create something for themselves. So Mary and George and all those that were going through hiring problems, we know about those today, don't we? Nobody wants to work, they say. They solved their own problems, creating employment companies that then reached into Virginia and the South and brought people up here to work in the service industries. And those people often stayed. Some of the most prominent families that we know today came from Culpeper, Virginia, because of those employment agencies. Her advocacy of social uplift and equal standard for men and women in the economy and thrift is the stepping stone of the race. That's a direct quote from her obituary. Another person wrote about her. Mrs. Dickerson was considered one of the brightest business women in Newport, her name standing conspicuously as one of sound judgment and wise in counsel. When Mary was about 85 years old, getting older, needing help, there was a young woman who had worked in her dress shop. And I'm going to back up because I want you to see her. Oh, I guess you can't see it. Can you see it? Margaret Kinsfork. Margaret Kinsfork, when Mary turned 80, loved her. She moved in and took care of her until Mary's death. So much so, as you see here, Mary added her name to the property that she was actually living in, so that when she passed, Margaret would still have a place to live. That was the kind of person that Mary was. It goes beyond what she was. We all know she was a dressmaker. We all know she had capabilities. We all know that she could do that. But more importantly, she did that. At the end of her life, at 85 years old, Mary passed away in 1914. She's not buried in Newport. Mary returned to her first love and is buried with her first husband, John Vermont. And yet on her stone, his stone, it doesn't say Vermont. It still says Mary H. Dickerson, because that is the name that was known by everyone. That is the name that goes down in history. So I want you all to remember Mary Huntington Dickerson. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you to Kate Peterson and the Preservation Society of Newport County for inviting me to be part of this conversation about African American women designers and dressmakers. And I'm delighted to be part of this conversation with Theresa Guzmán Stokes. It is important to think about Ann Lowe as an artist, driven by the passions of her heart to make beautiful dresses and to work for the most elite families in America. She would become one of America's most iconic designers and be an inspiration for other African Americans to enter into the fashion industry. And I'm going to talk about two things in particular. The fact that she was able to realize her dreams, even though she faced major obstacles, both personal and societal, and that there were costs associated with achieving her dreams. She was living during a time in which there was widespread discrimination against African Americans. While she was a creative genius, she did not have the business acumen to manage her business. She was able to establish multiple businesses in her name, and unfortunately, she lost them all. She lost her son in a tragic accident. She lost eyesight in her right eye and had significantly diminished vision in her left eye, which would ultimately force her to retire. Through it all, she never lost her ability to dream. And I want to leave you with a question that I want you to think about, and maybe we will discuss it and answer it. What did Ann Lowe need to do to achieve sustained success while operating her businesses between 1920 and 1970? Ann Lowe was born in 1898 in rural Clayton, Alabama, about 60 miles south of Montgomery. By the 1900s, her mother, Janie Cole Lowe, and her maternal grandmother, Georgia Tompkins, had established a reputable dressmaking business in Montgomery and were well known to the wealthiest families in the state. But allow me to make a quick departure here and provide some historical and cultural context related to cotillions, debutante balls, dressmakers, seamstresses, and the emergence of ready-to-wear clothing industries. Cotillions were basically a seasonal event that provided training for young people, usually between in middle school or high school. They were taught how to properly dress and behave in society. The season ended with a formal dinner and dance where young people dressed in beautiful ball gowns and tuxedos and demonstrated what they had learned. Similarly, debutante balls were formal affairs, but the purposes were different from cotillions. Debutante balls were a coming of age, rites of passage that were intended to announce to the world that a girl had officially matured into young adulthood. In general, young ladies made their debut around the ages of 16 to 21, but this could vary from region to region. In the past, and they were called debut balls, or rather than debutante. It was a family's way of affirming that their daughter was of good breeding and eligible for marriage. Dressmaking. Dressmaking was a respectable and socially acceptable profession for women, regardless of their age or race. And the business of dressmaking grew in proportion to I was checking my slides. I think we're a little bit ahead. Can we go back? We're not quite. Okay, can we stay right there? That'll be fine. Dressmaking, the business of dressmaking grew in proportion to the growth of the local community and the economy. Dressmakers were dependent upon the steady income of wealthy clients who would have been attending the cotillions and debutante balls and other affairs, holiday affairs throughout the year. Dressmakers were more highly skilled than seamstresses, and sometimes the two terms are used interchangeably, but they technically are different. Dressmakers could design, fit, and make complete and complicated garments. As a result, seamstresses tended to earn very low wages. Their work was demanding and there was no stable employment. By the late 19th century, department stores were emerging and were providing fashionable, ready-to-wear clothing for people. This contributed to fewer people looking for custom-made clothes, which adversely impacted the dressmaker's business. And by the early 1800s, mail order clothes or clothes that were purchased in store were the primary way that most consumers bought their clothes. Seamstresses and dressmakers found jobs in factories that emerged to support department store orders. The wages were better and often more security, provided more security and consistent pay. So even though Janie Cole Lowe and Georgia Thompson had an established dressmaking business that served affluent white patrons across the state, there were vulnerabilities. They were in a highly competitive, segregated, and subjective business. And in 1898, when Ann Lowe was born, their business was part of an industry that was in transition from home-based productions to large-scale manufacturing. We have to speculate if their prices were on par with white dressmakers in the state. Many African Americans were probably unwilling to demand prices that were commensurate with other dressmakers or dressmaking shops. Next slide, please. We know that Ann Lowe had the benefit of having an apprenticeship with the best of the best. Her apprenticeship started early because by the time she was 5, she was able to sew. And soon thereafterwards, she started gathering scraps of fabric to make flowers like those that she had seen in the family's garden. This creative effort would eventually lead to the signature components of dresses that she designed as an adult. In 1914, Lowe's mother died unexpectedly. She had been working on 4 gowns that were going to be for the a New Year's Eve affair. Ann Lowe stepped up and completed those gowns, one of which was for the First Lady of Alabama. So she established herself as a prominent dressmaker in the state, and she would have been about 16 years old at the time. So she was relatively young. 2 years later, she met an influential Tampa socialite, Josephine Edwards Lee, and it changed Ann Lowe's life. Mrs. Lee observed that Lowe's outfit was fashionable and exceptionally well made. Lowe informed her that she made the ensemble, which prompted Lee to invite Lowe to come to Florida, to come to Florida as a live-in dressmaker. That would have been quite an unusual invitation for her, because Mrs. Lee had 2 twin daughters. And Lowe, who was married at the time with a young baby, discussed the offer with her husband. You can imagine what he said. He wanted her to remain in Alabama as a housewife. Lowe chose to accept the offer and moved with her son to the Lee family estate in Tampa. She later described the opportunity as, quote, a chance to make all the lovely gowns I've always dreamed of. In April 1917, after having been there and starting her dressmaking business, Mrs. Lee allowed her to sew for other clients. Lowe left Tampa to attend the S.T. Taylor School of Design in New York City. The director was shocked and disturbed when she showed up because she was Black, and he had not anticipated that, and he didn't want to honor her admission, but he decided to allow her to attend the school, but segregated her in another room because the other students refused to be in class with an African American. Eventually, the director realized that Lowe's design and dressmaking skills were far more advanced than that of her classmate, and that there was very little that the school could teach her. He used her design as an example for the other students to follow. As a result of her exceptional ability, she was able to finish the program in half the time. She remained in New York for about a year and then returned to Tampa and the former clients that she had developed. Around 1918, Lowe opened her first boutique called Annie Cohen with the assistance of her second husband, Caleb West. And she kept that boutique open until she moved to New York permanently. In the early 1920s, she began making gowns for Florida's annual Gasparilla celebrations. And I would encourage you to go to the website and look at the Plant Museum. They have images of a couple of the gowns that Lowe made for the Gasparilla. One of the things that I've noted in those gowns is that they tended to have a great deal more beadwork than gowns that she made later on. They're more like the images that you're seeing on the screen with the decorative flowers that she made. From 1924 to 1929, Lowe was a primary designer for the women who attended the Gasparilla balls. And even after she had permanently left Tampa, she continued to maintain her relationships with her customers. Thank you. And here you see some of the images of the Gasparilla court in the 1920s. But she continued to maintain her relationships with her customers as she designed at least one gown for a Tampa client in 1957. But in 1929, she closed the Annie Cohen shop. And I will make a note here that sometimes you will see her name, her married name as Cohen, C-O-N-N-I-E, and sometimes C-O-H-E-N. I am using C-O-H-E-N because Ann Lowe's family says that that is the name, that is the correct name. And it shows on the birth certificate for Arthur, her son. But anyway, she relocated to New York City with her second her husband, Caleb West, whom she had married around 1920. The marriage did not last. And at least one contributing factor was because Lowe was totally committed to making beautiful gowns. She left Florida for New York in pursuit of her dream to build a dress shop in the city where she could make couture gowns for families that were on the social registry. From the late 1920s through the end of World War II, Lowe designed gowns for other fashion houses like Hattie Carnegie, Shea, Sonia, and Sonia Gowns Incorporated. Next slide, please. In 1947, the hand-painted gown that Olivia de Havilland wore when she accepted her Oscar for Best Actress for the movie To Each His Own was an Ann Lowe original. As was the practice at the time, the fashion house where the designer worked, Sonia Gowns Incorporated, was given credit for the gown, but the gown certainly received very high praises. Next slide. By 1950, Lowe had established her own Madison Avenue salon, where she provided services to prominent families such as the Rockefellers, Colgates, Auchincloss, as well as Marjorie Merriweather Post. Next slide. While in New York, she opened multiple dress salons that were in her name or a variation thereof. Next slide. Ann Lowe was very well respected among her peers, and her gowns were sought after fashions for weddings and debutante balls. Notable designers such as Christian Dior and Edith Head recognized and appreciated her work. Next slide. She received important commissions as a result of having her designs featured in luxury department stores such as Montaldo, Neiman Marcus, and I. Magnin. Some debutantes who wore Lowe's enchanting gowns appeared in Vogue and Vanity Fair, as well as other trendy magazines. And Lowe was thrilled to read about and to hear that the news that her gowns were the most popular. Next slide. Lowe achieved her goals. Further, the location of her business on Madison Avenue, and this is one of the businesses on Madison Avenue, were clear markers of her exceptional success as a major American designer of high fashion. Next slide. The 1950s were the apex of Lowe's career. In 1958, Lowe's son, Arthur, who was her partner and business manager, was killed in an automobile accident. During the years that he worked for her in the 1950s, it was the only time that Ann Lowe's businesses experienced financial stability. Next slide. Next slide. Ann Lowe is best remembered as the designer of Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy's wedding gown and the bridal party dresses as well. Next slide. When Bouvier married the then Senator John F. Kennedy in 1953, Lowe had worked for Jackie's mother, Janet Auchincloss, having designed her wedding gown as well as the Newport debut gowns of Jackie, her sister Lee, and stepsister Nina Auchincloss. Next slide. The Kennedy gown is considered one of the most iconic wedding gowns of all time. And although the wedding gown symbolizes Lowe's place in American history and American fashion history, it also brought significant challenges for Lowe. 10 days before the wedding, Lowe's shop flooded and destroyed the original gown and 10 bridesmaids' dresses. Lowe hired additional workers and worked overtime to reproduce what was lost. And she assumed the financial loss, which was substantial, and did not tell the bride or the bride's family. On the day of the wedding, Lowe arrived at the Auchincloss estate carrying the wedding gown. She was taking no chances that anything was going to happen to it, so she delivered it personally. The staff instructed her to go to the service entrance in the back. She refused to do so, indicating that the bride would not be dressed for the wedding if she had to use the back entrance. She went through the front door. This interaction lets us know that Lowe had a healthy sense of self and a healthy sense of self-worth. Next slide. Later, when journalists asked Mrs. Kennedy, Jacqueline Kennedy, about her designer, she did not identify Ann Lowe as the designer, but only said that it was a colored dressmaker. If she had named Lowe as the designer of the gown and bridal party's attire, it would have had a major impact on Lowe's career. It would have validated her contributions to the fashion industry as an exceptional designer. She would have been known to the world as the designer of Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy's wedding gown and wedding party's attire. What a lasting legacy. Instead, she would sink into obscurity after she retired in 1972. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, Lowe would have similar experiences throughout her life and career. Wealthy white clients sometimes underpaid her as they understood their advantage in a highly segregated fashion industry and society. Next slide, please. Lowe was among the members of, Lowe was known among the members of the social registry as, quote, their best kept secret, end of quote. They knew that she was one of the most extraordinary designers, bar none. While the statement was intended as a compliment, it was a cruel secret that did little to benefit Ann Lowe. And race was likely a major factor in keeping her a secret. If she had been Christian Dior or Coco Chanel, her clients would have proudly proclaimed that their garments were made by those designers. Why not Ann Lowe? In 1960, her store was closed after amassing major tax debts. Next slide. Afterwards, she began working for Saks Fifth Avenue's The Atom Room, a prestigious and exclusive bridal and debut salon within the department store. Saks placed ads, the one you see here, in major magazines to inform their clientele that Ann Lowe would be working for them. She worked for Saks Fifth Avenue from 1960 until 1962. Through that association, she created gowns and dresses for some of the major balls in Texas, Nebraska, and St. Louis, Missouri. Her partnership with Saks was uneven and short-lived, as it was not to her advantage. The arrangement with Saks required her to pay her staff and purchase her own materials and notions, which were of the highest quality and very expensive. Saks provided a workroom. They set the sale prices for each gown, which were lower than Lowe's investment of labor and materials. Lowe lost considerable money, and in 1963 declared bankruptcy, as well as lost her right eye to glaucoma. When she left Saks in 1962, Lowe opened a small workshop on 53rd Street. She would have to close that shop in that same year because she owed $12,800 in back taxes. Eventually, the tax debt was paid by an anonymous supporter. Many believe that it was Jackie Kennedy, and Ann Lowe believed that as well. Between 1962 and 1964, she worked for Madeline Couture, a custom dress shop on Madison Avenue. Next slide. And she and Florence Cowell established A.F. Chantilly on Madison Avenue in 1965. She would continue to work and work under her own name with Ann Lowe Originals from 1968 until she retired in 1972. Next slide. I want to end with two things. One, a quote that I think perfectly describes Ann Lowe. And then I want to give you the opportunity to hear Ann Lowe in her own voice talking about her work. Jessica Reagan, an associate curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Costume Institute, said, quote, "She was a brilliant example of the American couture tradition, a sculptural designer whose work was a dialogue with the body of the woman who wore it," end of quote. And after the program, the Preservation Society will be sharing a link with you of a recorded interview of Ann Lowe in 1964 on the Mike Douglas show. It's about 20 minutes in length. And at the end of the interview, about minute 16, you will see a hand-beaded, plum-colored satin coat and dress. And I am delighted to say that that coat is part of the Ann Lowe collection at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And when the donor gave it to us, she said that there was a dress that was part of it, because I asked her, I said, usually this type of formal coat had a dress. And she said, in fact, it did have the dress, but she did not know what had happened to it. And so you will be able to see the actual dress in that video. Thank you.
Thank you. Is this on? There we go. Thank you so much, Elaine. Can you hear me from Newport?
I can.
Great. Theresa, would you like to join us up here so we can have a little discussion? I think before we take any, I wonder if we could show that photo of the last photo of Ann Lowe again, if that's okay. Her dresses are gorgeous, but I think we need to give a shout out to her hats because they are superb. So thank you so much, Elaine, for sharing all these wonderful photos with us. And Theresa, thank you so much for coming. It's a delight to be with you all this evening. Pardon me while I sit with my broken foot. But we just have a few discussion topics we thought that we would share with the audience this evening. And I think where I'd love to start, because you both are working with women of very different times, the research process in terms of finding information about Ann Lowe and about Mary Dickerson must not have been easy and simple. And I'm wondering if you could describe for us your individual perspectives on that research process. And I'll let Theresa begin with us.
Well, researching someone who left no records is not fun. But she was so well known in Newport, and she was so busy that most of my research involved city directories, tax records, 12 different death notices, just digging up anything I could find on her, mostly through the women's clubs, and definitely from the people that were around her.
And you'd mentioned church records as well.
Yes, church records are a valuable source of information.
Absolutely.
It's very good.
Elaine, could you just detail your research into Ann Lowe?
Well, it's not an ending process, it's still ongoing. And I actually have to credit the late Margaret Powell. She did her master's thesis on Ann Lowe, and she was working at the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh and had planned to do an extensive exhibition about Ann Lowe when she passed away of breast cancer a couple of years ago. And Margaret was generous because we had a collection of Ann Lowe gowns in the museum that came to us as part of the Black Fashion Museum that operated in New York and was established by Lois Alexander Lane. And in 2007, they donated that collection to the museum, but we were able to further expand our collection because of Margaret Powell. She wasn't interested in collecting the gowns that she saw. She was interested in collecting the stories and looking at the interior instructions in construction of the gowns to see how they were made. So she would often call me and say, Elaine, this person has an Ann Lowe gown, and they are interested in donating it to the museum. So as I said, I have to pay tribute to the research that she did, and also the fact that she helped us build our collection of Ann Lowe gowns. And so I'm continuing to do that research when I'm talking to people about the various gowns that Ann Lowe made for them, and still looking for, there are a lot of unanswered questions that we want to have. There's more to the story, so it's an ongoing process.
What experiences with clientele would they have shared across their generational differences? I mean, obviously, they're both well-known women in terms of the dresses that they produce, but clearly also very not well-known for what we think were intentional purposes. I don't know if you could both speak to that in your respective areas of research.
I'll let Elaine
Elaine?
go first this time.
Well, Ann Lowe was known to the people who were the wealthiest individuals in society. Again, this best kept secret, it was a secret among themselves. It's one of the reasons I asked that question at the beginning, to say, what could she have done differently such that she would have been able to sustain her business during this really very, very long career that she had. And she goes into, there's a period of obscurity where people don't know who Ann Lowe is when she's not working anymore after 1972. She passes away in 1981. And so people are rediscovering Ann Lowe. And I think it's so important for us to continue to figure out how we discover who those dressmakers are that are, who are, quote, unknown, but also the ones like Ann Lowe that we do know about, that we keep preserving that legacy.
For Mary Dickerson, I think that in contrast, she was a very astute businesswoman. And, opening a shop on Bellevue Avenue in a brand new Travers block was making a statement of here I am. And for that reason, it attracted a lot of attention. She also made a point to advertise consistently whenever new French patterns were coming in, so that, everyone knew if you wanted the newest, you had to come to her.
Very savvy. What did it mean to be a woman in business? I know you both touched on this with your remarks, but in their respective times, it was quite different. And by the time Ann Lowe is successful in her career, there are many women who are having high fashion careers as well. But Mary she's a forerunner. She's truly making her way in uncharted territory, as you mentioned. And so how would that have impacted their personal lives? We know it impacted their marriages, but how would it have impacted their personal lives otherwise?
I think that for Mary, you have to remember she had no children with John Vermont, and when she married Silas Dickerson, he was recently widowed. His former wife or late wife was Susan Rice of the Rice family. So she marries into a family that's already very well known in Newport. But she also marries a man who's just as involved in his business. He not only owned properties, he ran a grocery here in Newport and a secondary grocery in Jamestown because he realized people weren't going to take the ferry to Newport. So he opened two groceries. And although he did have a child, when he married her, he had his young son, Frederick, who later sees Mary as his mother. So I think that, and I think that would have impacted her as to why she felt it was so important to open a nursery, because she herself was working and trying to raise a young child. So it didn't affect her marriage in the sense that it caused strife there. If anything, I think they supported each other a lot in terms of their business.
That's great. Elaine.
In Ann Lowe's second marriage, well, let me say this. I don't know that gender was as much of a problem for Ann Lowe as race was. And from reading about her, I am convinced that she wanted to have successful marriages, but she was just driven, really driven by this desire to make these dresses that she saw. And at one point I read an account where she said with the second marriage, that he just couldn't tolerate the idea that, she'd wake up at maybe some 2 o'clock in the morning or something and jump out of bed because she had to draw a sketch of something that she had dreamed about or something she saw in her head. I think the biggest factor, again, was race, but also, unfortunately, she did not have the business acumen to be successful. And that was a major part of it. I don't remember reading any accounts where people talked about her where her gender was a factor, but clearly race was.
I'll just ask one more question before we get to question and answers with our colleague here, Claire Barney-Walt. But if Ann Lowe and Mary Dickerson could meet, what a question this is. But if they had the opportunity to meet, what do you imagine the two of them might speak about? What would they share in common? What would they find in their differences?
Yeah, the obvious thing is that they love clothes. They love creating beautiful clothes. They love making women feel beautiful in their clothes. And in fact, one woman talked about the fact that when Ann Lowe made a gown for you, you might not necessarily be an attractive person, but you felt that way because of the gown. And people who study dressmaking and appreciate the construction of her gowns, because she made them such that all you had to do is step in the gown. You didn't have to have undergarments. She made the gowns so that they could be adjusted. If you lost weight, if you gained weight, it was something that was designed just to fit you, and it could accommodate you. So you can understand people's love for and appreciation. I think those would have been the kinds of things that they would have talked about.
For myself, well, first off, I think she would have fallen in love with Ann's clothes.
And vice versa.
Yeah, well, probably because she didn't have to use as much material as Mary did. Certainly the clothes were much bigger at that time. But knowing Mary's story and her history and how she felt about serving her community, I think that first off, I think she would have been quizzing Anne like crazy about what did it feel like to cast a vote? You know, what is going on right now in your time period that, you know, has gotten better from ours? I think those would have been major issues. Mary loved clothes, loved making clothes. But I think her passion and her obsession was the societal issues that were going on at the time.
Well, with that, I'm sure our audience has lots of questions for us. I just want to again thank Elaine and Theresa for being with us. This was so wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to pass the microphone over to my colleague Claire, who will happily pass you the microphone if you'd raise your hands for questions. So here you go, Claire.
Thank you, Claire. Theresa, fantastic. Thank you. Love, love, love. Mary Dickerson, we're in Alva Vanderbilt's home, and she allowed women to meet, Black and white women, to meet and discuss the opportunities that they need to take to figure out how to vote. Did Mary Dickerson come here? Was she one of those Black women? Did you find that in your research anywhere?
I don't know that we'll ever know. We don't have Mary's papers, and I don't think Mrs. Vanderbilt wrote about her. If she did, we don't know that yet. But, you know, Trudy and I were talking about this yesterday in conversation. And we know the passion that Mary Dickerson had and how she believed in equality for women. I cannot imagine that she would be in a bedroom or a dressing room adjusting a dress and fixing the hem and not talking about it. She certainly wasn't shy. And I do believe that they were issues so important to her that it kind of, I guess the best word is rose above race. It was, these are issues that are important to me. Why aren't they important to you? And really kind of went at it.
Another question?
Can you speculate on why Mrs. Kennedy failed to recognize her, or is that just not fair to do?
What was the question again?
Would you speculate, if you can, on why Mrs. Kennedy failed to recognize Ann Lowe as Ann Lowe?
I've been asking myself that question a lot. And I don't have a good answer. I don't know that I can really figure out what her motivation was. And it may have been just continuing the behavior of her set, and that is that people weren't mentioning her name. I know that Ann Lowe and Mrs. Kennedy continued to be in contact with each other. And it seemed to be on a friendly basis. There didn't seem to be any malice on Ann Lowe's part, and certainly not Mrs. Kennedy's toward her. And I suspect she might have regretted, if she was the person who in fact paid the bill, the tax bill, she might have regretted not identifying her as the person, because surely she would have known the impact that it would have had on her career.
I think we have time for one more question.
It's me again, Elaine.
Yeah.
You had mentioned that Anne came to Newport to deliver the dress to Hammersmith Farm. Do we know anything about her visit to Newport, where she stayed or how long she was here? And if you don't, maybe we can do some digging for you.
I was going to say, you all can help me with that. Maybe she didn't stay. I don't know. I know she took the train up to Newport because, again, she was concerned, given the fact that she had had this tragic flood and lost the dress and 10 of the other bridesmaids' dresses, she wasn't going to allow anything to happen to it. So she was delivering it herself. But I would love it if you could look in your records to see if there's anything about where she stayed or if they wrote about her experience being there. That would be wonderful.
We're on it. That's our homework. Thank you so much, Elaine. And thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We look forward to seeing you at our next lecture. Thank you for your support.
Thank you.